gonna do some wall squats while I introduce you, get my fitness in while I'm down the. Okay, but people aren't back yet. Oh, wait a minute. Whew. This will be a fast introduction if I'm squatting the wall. Okay. Okay, here they come. Thank you for patiently waiting. This is Zoomers' return. Okay, Zoomers. Audio check. Should I cut off my head? No, I don't have to. No, I'm in here because then it's all set for Christian. I got it. So good morning, everyone. Welcome back, Zoomers. It is with great delight that I introduce this morning Christian Baizan Solorzano. Christian is a designer, a photographer, an artist, and a writer of newsletters, Beginner's Mind, among many other things. At the center here, though, Baizan is a certified mindfulness and meditation teacher, the creator of many of our beautiful graphics and marketing pieces that capture all of the goings-on at the center. Also, I have to say, stunning photos that he does from time to time, capturing those beautiful moments here at the center, like my ordination last week. Thank you. Just thought I'd slip that in. But this morning, I would like to introduce Christian as he gives this morning's talk in praise of boredom.
Can everyone hear me online? Cool. Thanks for the introduction. Thank you everyone for being here. I always, I'm not a big fan of any time, I don't like introductions because I feel like all those titles that Junmei just said about me are all true, but I hate labels, and I always cringe a little bit anytime someone calls me a photographer or all of those things. Because to me, a lot of that stuff just comes so natural, and I feel like it's just a small fraction of who I feel like I am. I'm also a brother, a son, a dog owner, and a tea drinker, and a sleeper, like all these other things. So I hate the limitations of being defined as just a few things, because I think all of us were much more than what we are. So this talk, I've given several talks in the past. I gave one on the Zen and creativity, and then I also did one a year or so ago on doing nothing. So even though it seems like I do a lot, I think I'm quite lazy as a person, and I also enjoy doing nothing, and I love being bored. And I think a lot of creativity and joy and a lot of my ideas tend to come from spaces of boredom. So I try to have a boring practice, and I think meditation is pretty boring. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but it could be pretty boring sometimes, like especially if you have a lot of things to do, or if you want to, if it's especially meditating on a really warm, sunny day, being inside with yourself, with your thoughts, could be pretty boring. So, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. We tend to, especially growing up, I was always under the impression that if you were bored, it meant that you were a boring person, and if you were a boring person, it was not a very good thing. So I grew up believing that, and I think a part of me probably still believes that a little bit, but I try to, like I mentioned, give myself opportunities where I could just do nothing. And usually for me, it's early in the morning or afternoon or right before bed. So I want to start off by just mentioning that there's a huge, our attention is a huge economy. And I think everything that we see on a day-to-day basis, whether it's on the television, YouTube, on our phones, everything is trying to steal and rob our attention. My day job is I'm a product designer, so I do a lot of user interface design. So I get to work with a lot of the psychology that goes behind getting people hooked on applications. Luckily, I don't work in advertising. I work on a product that actually helps people be productive, but there's still a lot of what are referred to as dark patterns that go behind the scenes to get people hooked, to get people to spend more time viewing something to get them to use something for a longer amount of time. And the more and more of these digital devices that we keep incorporating into our lives, I think our attention is becoming more and more fragmented. And I think being bored, meditating, Zen practice is a big way to combat. It's a big form of activism, I would think. To sit with your thoughts and to do nothing, I think is a pretty radical practice that unfortunately I think it's not something that we really talk about as much. We talk about it here, but when we're out in the world, it just seems like everything is robbing our attention. Even just being in an elevator, there's a little kiosk, a little screen on an elevator sometimes that's just a slideshow of celebrity gossip, news, weather, all sorts of things. Cars today also have like these big screens. Roshi, you would know this. My car too. My car has apps on it, and sometimes when I'm driving, I find myself just like at a red light, just swiping and checking out different applications, checking the weather, all sorts of things. So I've been noticing that even when I'm waiting for the water to boil, I'm on my phone, like scrolling. Or the other day I was brushing my teeth and I set my phone like by the mirror so that I could watch a video while I was brushing my teeth. And I mean, there's just so much content out there, and it's entertaining, it's fun, you learn a lot from it, but I don't know, it's kind of scary to just think about how much stuff is out there trying to get our attention. Even podcasts, like walking my dog in the morning, I tend to listen to an audiobook or a podcast because I feel like I need to be productive while doing something as simple as walking my dog. So I remember a long time ago, there was the clothing store Gap. They had a campaign, and their campaign was Be Normal. And if you're familiar with Gap's clothes, it's all very normal, boring clothes. It's like basic jeans, basic t-shirt, like they're not pretty innovative when it comes to their fashion. And I remember they got so much hate for this campaign because it was boring, and it wasn't anything that was attention grabbing. It wasn't very interesting. It was just people dress very normal, doing very normal things. And when you see that alongside a lot of other marketing campaigns, to me, it stands out and it's more interesting. So I almost feel like to be an interesting person or to be a creative person, being a little bit more ordinary, I feel stands out more nowadays. So I think for artists, in my case, for designers, or for just any person in the world that's trying to maybe differentiate themselves, I think normal, boring is a good is a good mode of disruption today. So our industry, just marketing, capitalism, everything is profit driven. In design, for example, we tend to work through a methodology that's called human-centered design, and it's about putting humans at the center of just about everything. And over the past few years, there's been a lot of criticism around this concept of human-centered design being actually corporate-centered design, or just prioritizing a very select number of humans that tend to be stakeholders and the people that have the money and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's always good to be suspicious. I think it's good to be skeptical and to just realize that big corporations and all these, big tech giants, despite the number of awesome products that they provide us, I don't think our interest is in their best interest. So just something I want to talk about. And my employer would probably be very upset if they were here, if they heard me talking about these things. But I've been trying to be more vocal and open about these things. So even during the workday, I try to drop little little bombs throughout meetings very subtly. So, so there's too many options. I think also the self-care industry, which I would think that meditation and Buddhism are definitely a part of the self-care industry, because self-help, mindfulness, trauma, depression, anxiety, all these topics that we tend to cover in Zen Buddhism are all definitely a part of the self-help industry. But one of my issues that I have with the self-help industry is that it tends to profit on our fears and our anxieties. There's always a new book about something. And for me, I always feel like I just finished reading one book, and then there's another book that I feel like I need to read to complete this understanding. So it's almost like I'm always chasing this sense of, like, maybe it's unworthiness in myself that I feel like I always need to be fixed, or I always need to be learning something. And it's funny because a lot of these newer books, a lot of these newer videos and podcasts and all these things, they're actually teaching a lot of ancient teachings that have been around for a very long time, but sometimes they're just repackaged in an entirely new way. Sometimes there's new terms that are associated with a lot of these teachings. So something that Roshi Robert tends to mention is that Zen practice is not a self-improvement project. And I think that when we sit here together, we're not doing it to become better people or to improve. I think rather it's about stripping ourselves of all these narratives that we think a lot about, that maybe we're broken, maybe we're unworthy of love, maybe we're not deserving of being with ourselves. So I think boredom is also a good way to just drop that narrative and just be able to come home to who we are, who we truly are. And it takes some time to it takes some time to sometimes get a little bit of a glimpse as to who we truly are, because what I've noticed that when we come into this boredom, we're coming to realization with our to-do lists, maybe our sense of feeling like we're not good at being bored, or that we just don't know how to sit. But when we cut through all that chatter and that busy mind, we can actually start to get little glimpses of what I call joy or creativity, or this big self that we sometimes talk about here at the center. So, and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about boredom is because when we do things like doing nothing, counting the breath, it's boring in the sense that that's all that there is. When we're sitting down, just paying attention to the breath, there's no drama happening there. There's no story. And I think by default, we tend to enjoy the drama or the stories that we tell ourselves. Even today, this morning, when I was meditating, there's just stories that sometimes I'll bring up, whether it's things that are going to be happening during the week or things of the past. I think we have a natural inclination to wanting some kind of drama or some kind of anxiety, because we're familiar with it. And sometimes we feel as if when we don't have those things, we lose a sight of what we think of we lose a sight of what we believe to be our self-identity. And I know, speaking for myself, it's very easy to identify, for example, as a photographer, as a mindfulness teacher, as a graphic designer, as a Buddhist, and all these other things, that if all of those things disappear tomorrow, it's like, who am I? And I think that big question of who are you could be very scary for some people. And I think meditation or boredom is a great way to just face that big question of who am I? Who are you when you're not? Who am I when I'm not Christian, or when I'm not a brother or a Dharma speaker? And I'm nothing. Like that's what I think. That's the conclusion is like, I'm just some dude that, got mosquito bites the other day and is very itchy and sometimes doesn't sleep very well, sometimes gets angry, sometimes gets sad. Like that's who I am. And when we cover ourselves with all these titles and all these accolades and all these, our careers and all these other things, it's almost like a shield that we use as a defense mechanism. And I see it happen all the time. I see it in myself, I see it in my peers, that sometimes when we introduce ourselves to other people, it's always, my name is Christian, and these are the things that I do. And it's kind of lame, in my opinion. It is. In graphic design and design in my industry, we all have, it's very normal for us to have a portfolio, like an online portfolio of our work. And every about me page or every mission statement is always the same thing. It's, I'm Christian, I'm a value-driven graphic designer, I help corporations meet their business goals, whatever. If you swap out that name, it could be anyone else. And I always tell people, like, forget that. Like, you don't need to say those things. Let the work speak for itself. Let your actions speak for itself, because sometimes the things that you do speak louder than anything that could possibly come out of your mouth. So when we give ourselves the opportunity to be bored, some of the questions that might come to mind is, am I doing it right? Am I being bored the right way? Or even when we're sitting, is like, am I sitting the right way? Am I counting my breath the right way? And we tend to think in binary terms of right or wrong, good or bad. But those are just opinions, and there's no right or wrong way to be bored. I think if you're thinking about those things, then you're probably doing it the right way, because there a lot of things come up in boredom, and those questions come up in boredom. But if you just catch yourself and you acknowledge and you pay attention to that mode of thinking, but not judge it, just sit with it. It's like clouds passing by. Am I doing this right? That passes by. What am I gonna have for dinner? That passes by. And it's just like weather. It's just like the weather. Sometimes it's rainy, sometimes it's sunny. And I think boredom is a lot like that. You're gonna have periods of boredom where you might feel very anxious to get up and to, complete your to-do lists. And other times you might have boredom that might feel very creative, and that maybe when you get up, you have this big epiphany, this big idea to maybe write something down, or to make a painting, or to have a conversation with someone. So it's always gonna be different. There's no one way to be bored. And I think that's the beauty of our Zen practice, is that it's spontaneous, it's a big spectrum of things. Boredom is a container that I think allows for a lot of magic and a lot of ordinary, mundane things to happen. And I think this spaciousness is probably what we're all chasing after. And it requires very little. It just requires that you set aside some time, maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe an afternoon, maybe an entire day, maybe it's Sunday, where maybe you're not working on that day. And you just give yourself an opportunity to be as unproductive as possible. Like, don't do anything. Just don't do anything. And it's difficult because sometimes I think you have to create the conditions to do nothing. So it might be, if you're planning on having a day of nothing on a Sunday, maybe on Saturday, that's when you do your laundry, you clean your house, you get a good night's sleep, you don't stay up late, you get groceries that are gonna be good for you, so that everything on Sunday or on your lazy day could go relatively easy for yourself. Because I've noticed that if I don't sleep well, if I don't eat well, boredom becomes much more difficult because if you're hungry, if you're starving, if your stomach is growling, if your back hurts, if you have bills to pay that are due on that day, it's going to be much more difficult to just sit and settle into yourself. So don't just go into it with, you can go into it with no planning whatsoever, but it's nice to create little containers for yourself. For me, boredom is best when my house is super clean. I'm a big fan of vacuuming, so I've noticed that it's difficult to be bored if I have a dog, if there's a lot of dog hair on the floor, and I just sit there, I'm just gonna be thinking about the dog hair. Or, I don't know, some dust on my bookshelf or something. So create the conditions for yourself, like make it comfortable for yourself. It's easier that way. And it sounds, and I feel like it might sound a little bit privileged to say that, to say create comfort for yourself, because I know that comfort is something that maybe not everyone has access to, or maybe not everyone is able of doing. Like I don't have any kids, so I know probably boredom is probably going to be a little bit more difficult for people that have kids or a busy life. So don't feel bad. Like make it work for yourself. Make it be something that is flexible. Make it be something that works for your situation. And sometimes it might be going for a drive with no music, or going on a walk without a phone. So it doesn't have to be super glamorous. It doesn't have to be very zen. It could be very ordinary nothingness, very ordinary boredom. So like I was mentioning a little bit earlier, we tend to cling to our identities, and it's very easy to get hooked on them. And it's very easy to just think that our worth as a person is dependent on the things that we do, which is why this practice of boredom is a good way to just suspend and let go a lot of that narrative. Does anyone have any examples of boredom that you practice, or when do you guys feel like, I'm curious about how do you guys respond to boredom, or what does boredom mean to you? What does that mean to you? Very curious. Anyone online, or Mark?
Since we're talking about boredom, actually, I'm going to poke a hole in your balloon.
Okay.
The word boredom, I think of as a very negative term. It has, in the French, they call it ennui, not knowing what to do at all. So I don't think of boredom in the way that you seem to be talking about it. I just want to say that in Buddhism, we talk about emptiness. And I really have been reflecting on the difference between what you're projecting as boredom and the way when I have nothing to do, that's okay, because everything is empty. I don't need to search for something.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, I think I would equate emptiness with boredom, because to me, boredom is just that void that we're so afraid to experience. And I would say it's, the term boredom is a little bit more digestible than speaking about emptiness.
Anyone online? Anyone else? Oh, right here. Oh, Roshi.
So I got a new way to do my about page. I'm Bob and I'm boring. I really enjoyed your talk. Trungpa used to speak of it as cool boredom,
Yeah.
but and the idea of a day of boredom, to me, that sounds kind of like having a Sabbath day, where you don't do any, where you're not producing anything, and you're just allowing yourself to, be ordinary. I really liked your talk. I think it's, I often say when people ask, if I'm doing meditation right or wrong, I say, well, if you're bored, you're probably doing it pretty good, you know. Shamatha practice is boring. You're counting your breath, you know. There's nothing spectacular about it. You're seeing if you can get to 10 and noticing that you don't. You know, that's the boredom, you know. I really enjoyed your talk.
Over here, Jun Roshi.
Yeah, I think our culture has has this really negative connotation of boredom, and it's really hard to kind of shake that. So I really appreciated your talk, and Trungpa Rinpoche's quote of "cool boredom." You know, I don't know if that's putting a positive spin on boredom, but it sounds pretty cool to me. It's cool.
Over here to Ken.
Thank you. I also am a warrior against the self-care industrial complex, Baizan. But what really resonated for me was when you were talking about at work, because I find that in work, that a lot of the people that I work with and have worked with are part of what I call the cult of busy.
Yeah.
If you ask somebody to do something, I can't, I'm too busy. Well, wait a minute. You know, you're too busy doing what in order not to do what needs to get done for the company during the hours so it's definitely a shield. I'm too busy to do what I need to do.
Yeah.
And when I take that into my own space, it reminds me too of solitude versus loneliness. I always equated being alone with being lonely. And now I crave solitude because no people. It's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Over here, Gary.
Thank you. I'm scarily finding myself aligned with almost everything that you're saying. But two things kind of jumped off the page for me. And one is titles. How we surround ourselves with titles sometimes. And I call it title inflation. And I deal with a lot of people that have big titles. I write, and I have to ID them in my stories. And you would be surprised, or maybe not, how much flack I get sometimes when I try to reduce 3 or 4 lines of a title down to one short sentence.
Yeah.
And university professors, no offense. And then the other thing is, if all the men's clothing stores went out of business tomorrow except the Gap, I'd still be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also want to mention that, and this is going to sound like, well, it is a paradox, but boredom could be fun. I remember when I first started meditating here at the center years ago, all of a sudden I could hear the insects at night. And for some reason, I would never, they're always there, but I never paid attention to them. So I noticed myself paying attention more closely to all these things around me. And I remember the insects, just the crickets, being very vivid and so loud at night. And also feeling emotional when I was walking in a forest and the trees are so big and the leaves and the shadows. So I think boredom teaches you to be a little bit more hypersensitive to your surroundings. And poetry, music, arts, a lot of those artists, I think, were probably people that were pretty boring, because if you're going to create a large body of work and leave behind a big legacy that to this day we're still talking about, that to this day we're still being inspired about, most likely you had to be very solid, like a person that enjoyed solitude, and probably a person that to other people would probably be pretty boring, because to paint, to make music, to write, you can't do those things while you're, at a party or, having a fun time out and about. So I'm also a big fan of solitude, and I've noticed that when I retreat into my boredom and into my solitude, I actually end up being more productive than when I try to be productive. So it's always interesting, because sometimes people will ask me, how is it that I'm able to do all the things that I do? And I always struggle with answering that question because I genuinely do not know. I just go downstairs in my house and I just sit there, and then all of a sudden things start to happen by themselves. So if anyone here wants to be more creative or feel more sensitive to your surroundings or be more, have more appreciation for the things that are everywhere all the time, I think this cool boredom is a good practice. Yep. Yeah.
What word might you use other than boredom?
Other than boredom.
I'm sure you've thought about this.
Other than boredom, I mean, you said emptiness, but I don't want to.
No, I don't. Let's put it in the just common vernacular. Forget Buddhism.
Okay. Other word than
Forget
boredom.
Zen.
Yeah.
Just your life.
Yeah.
Well, which is Zen, of course, but.
I would say relaxing or like chilling out, like laying back.
Because my grandson might say to me, I'm bored.
Yeah.
You know, I'm bored. Or people say, I'm bored. You know, I'm depressed and I'm bored.
Yeah.
But now what you just said sounds completely different.
Yeah. Well, that's
And so this is why I brought up the puncturing the balloon a minute ago.
Well, I feel like it's important to redefine words, and in this case, boredom has such a negative connotation that I think it needs a new definition, or here I am trying to redefine it or own it in my terms. And I think we should all, I encourage everyone all the time to take ownership of the words that they use. Like, don't let things be defined by other people. So that's what I'm doing here.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you. Interestingly, last night I was with my best friend who's a psychologist, and we were like just playing games and being silly, and she's like, okay, here's a quiz. What are I think it was 7 negative emotions. And her son and I were like, okay, envy, and he was naming the things from that movie. Inside Out. But the last one we finally figured out was boredom. So in psychology, boredom is one of the primary negative emotions, apparently. I just learned this last night. So that's interesting that you're saying it in such a positive way. And I agree that word doesn't resonate with me as much because I'm kind of the camp of only boring people are boring, right? Or feel boredom. Because sometimes and especially in this busy world, people might welcome boredom, especially if you have kids or if you're constantly going, where boredom might be like, which is what you're framing it in a good way, like it's welcome. But I think that the word is confusing, but I love the message of just taking that time to just be.
Yeah. I like that it's also a little bit provocative, like it's a little controversial to reframe it in that way. And also I think of boredom as something that you develop a relationship with over time. So it'll evolve, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice to see everyone. It's my second time here. Thank you. Heart, stop racing. Very simple of just jovial interaction. You know, it's this. So that's very resonating. I just, whenever you mentioned boredom, I thought of doing nothing. That's how, without stripped out the negative connotations, then it's very relatable to me. So growing up, you grew up on this. You always have to do something, always have to be productive, always working towards achieving something. So anytime, even if I just couldn't relax and watch a movie and feel good about myself, usually I would scold myself. Why did I waste that time? Even if that's 5 minutes, I would scold myself or suffer myself, like, why did I waste that time? How can I squeeze in that extra bit of learning, whether that's listening to podcast or thinking about how to do better at work? Ends up taking a lot of my consciousness. So this doing nothing is very hard for me. I'm getting better at this. Hopefully this all helps there. Even as a parent, like, why I haven't spent this last 5 minutes thinking about what's best for my son, So it's a suffering. It is that suffering. So that's how I was reflecting on it. But that's your natural state. You shouldn't have to suffer to be at your natural state.
Yeah.
Over here, Diane.
Thank you for your talk. I'm boring. Realizing that I think it's like thinking through this. It's like I have all this stuff going in my head all the time. So it's like I'm creating things. And when I listen, I think that your definition sounds like lack of external stimulation and more on the internal stimulation. It's like if you shut everything from the outside, all these things that can take our attention, then we move into this more hearing ourselves. Does that resonate? Does that feel right?
Yeah, it resonates with me. I started practicing Tai Chi last year here in Oak Park. And people sometimes ask me about like, how is it? What do you guys do? And I tell them, if you were to walk in on one of our classes, you would just see like people just standing there like this for 10 minutes. Then we move, and now we're like this. It is boring, but so much stuff is happening on the inside. And you're becoming so, the word I'll use again is like just hypersensitive to the energy around you. And then once class is over, you take that essence or that training with you, and you notice that throughout your day, you're able to bring that stillness, that silence, that cool boredom into everyday activities. And I've noticed that when that happens, I'm able to be more present, and I'm able to respond to things more appropriately, and I'm able to be a little bit more skillful. So I think a lot of it is just the internal and like getting rid of all the external stimulus. And to your point, reflecting on things such as how can I be a better father, or what can I do for my son? I think that stuff is perfectly normal, and I think it's only when you give yourself those 5 minutes of nothingness that maybe important questions like that come up, where did I say the right thing, or am I doing the right things for my family, etc. So I wouldn't feel bad about those things naturally coming up, because they're coming up because they're important to you,
So I think boredom is a really good word, because it does bring up a lot of different, we have different reactions to it, and some of them are quite negative. Another possible word for boredom might be spaciousness. In another case, it might be spaced outness. You might be spaced out.
Yeah.
In a certain context, that's probably not a very good thing to be, In another context, if you're an artist and you're daydreaming, that might be really fruitful.
Yeah.
I think spaciousness comes close to what boredom is, because we are so wired to these devices, and you all see it, and we all do it too. When you see people walking, reading their, I'm surprised they don't walk into a tree. But we're always reaching, we are always reaching for these cell phones when we feel discomfort, when there's a gap in our day, when there's anything that bothers us. And I think part of what I hear you saying is allowing boredom to be okay would allow us to not have to reach for the shiny object. And we might be more connected with people as a result, and more present and more aware of the crickets and things if we weren't constantly needing to be so busy. We're just on steroids.
Yeah. I love taking road trips down south, like Kentucky, Mississippi, Tennessee, and just being in rural America. And sometimes I'll be driving down like some long road, and I see people just on their front porch, just doing nothing. And maybe they don't, and maybe they don't have the nicest house or the accommodations that we have here in a city. But to me, that is true richness, to be able to just sit on your porch with someone next to you, not talking, not doing anything, and just like staring at like open field in front of you. It's to me, it's pretty cool. And I think we crave that, and I think that's why people come to retreats, or why people, try to take up meditation practices, because it's become such a luxury for a lot of us. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for your talk, and what resonated with me a lot is creating the conditions to actually give yourself that space for boredom, spaciousness. It's kind of, for me, it also sounds like creating conditions to be able to let go of a lot of things and have that sensory experience of things, or being present. So I think I have a kind of hard time with that. Sometimes it's like not creating those conditions, but wanting to be bored. But I think it's good, like having that in the forefront, to know that you also have to have an intention of creating those conditions and allowing yourself to have that time. And I wanted to say, like, as a parent, I had to like relearn, because when I became the parent, I thought like, oh, my child cannot be bored. Like, I have to like have all this time. And you see that a lot with other parents. Like, they go there, they go over there. There's 1,000 activities, and I have to like be that way. And we were even fighting with my husband, because he was like, let this boy like be bored for a while. Don't like put someone. But I was like, no, he has to do a lot. And now I'm seeing, or it took a while before I saw like, no, like he needs time to kind of have the space and be creative. So, but I think for the first time parents, it's kind of hard to get that idea, or I don't know for others, but for me, it was hard to get that idea in my head that I'm not responsible to give him activities to do so he can grow, learn, and so on.
Yeah.
I want to say that I loved your talk. I really did. I don't want you to think that I think your message was superb. And I don't know if any of you are aware of the new book, relatively new, by Jonathan Haidt, called The Anxious Generation. But he is dealing with exactly what Martina was talking about. The kids not knowing what to do, kids being, and not just kids, adults. Pat and I were in Santa Fe. We're sitting at dinner, having a great conversation. There's a couple diagonally over from us, a young, probably your age, to us, quite young. And this couple was hardly talking. They're looking at their phones, and they periodically talk to decide what dessert they're going to have, and then what special drink they're going to have. But most of the time, they're looking at their phones.
Yeah.
And it was incredible, and I imagine they were bored with each other.
Yeah. See, that's not the good boredom. That's
Exactly. But I just want to urge people, read this book.
Okay.
It's phenomenal.
The Anxious Generation.
Yes, by Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, Jonathan Haidt.
Anyone
Thank you, Mark.
online?
Over here. Anyone online? Here, Diane.
Okay, so,
Yeah, go.
So I'm revising my definition, and it's not then just the lack of external stimulation, it's what we're controlling of it. So like I keep myself really busy. Way too busy in my head. So I'm looking for things. I'm looking to understand things. I come across something, I don't understand a word. I'm looking in the dictionary. It's just like this whole, but I think that kind of external stimulation really isn't, well, it's part of the issue, but it's that I have to control it. So like if you're sitting and you're listening to the crickets, it's like who knows what you'll find, like crickets.
Yeah.
despair, something else. So it's really has a lot to do with the control of the stimulation that you're getting.
Yeah.
So if you leave yourself open to whatever there is, then that's like that space of emptiness and boredom. And
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Anyone online? Robin?
Christian, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to thank you a lot for the talk this morning. It really has struck me strongly because I noticed that as long as I can remember, I've had a fear of boredom. And I don't know if it was Roshi who used the word emptiness, but I think for me, it has a lot to do with the fear of emptiness. And I think it's great to be thinking about this and to really look at it. And I could say that being newly retired is a huge confrontation in many ways with that emptiness. You know, it's really great. You know, I can't fill everything with my business anymore. You know, it's created a huge space. So it's just all really good. I just appreciate so much you're using, bringing up this topic, and it's just a very good, healthy confrontation for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? This is Earl. Yeah. I've been retired for a long, long, long time. And I still struggle with not being productive. I have this, I guess it's a gene or something that we were born with. Like, you got to be doing something. You have to be accomplishing something. You can't just sit around and, oh, my parents would say mope, M-O-P, isn't it?
MOP.
Mope around. Come on, get out, do something, get a job. You know? Oh gosh, it's and I still struggle with I'm not worth anything if I'm not accomplishing something. Like, what is my purpose? Don't I have to accomplish something?
Yeah.
No, it's hard to learn. It's hard to learn. Yeah. Thank you.
Patrick, did you? It looked like you had your hand on the trigger a few times.
Yeah, thanks very much. Christian, I loved your talk. What it made me think about is the monastics. People who are monastics, one would say, is they are bored, or they must be bored all of the time. But when you read some of their literature, they are so in touch with humanity and so in touch with the nature of human beings. It's just amazing that for me to know so much about how people act and think. They actually get away from people and get away from all distractions. It just amazes me. But I really enjoyed what you had to say. I try and be as boring and bored as possible, as much as possible.
And I would just like to say thank you. What a great talk. But for maybe a little different reason, I feel like as you're speaking, I do see you strip away your titles and all of those sorts of things. And like, we get to see kind of who you are. And I think that's a beautiful example to give to everyone. I would just say how lovely you invite the Dharma to all of us with the way you open conversation is really a great gift for the Sangha. So thank you.
Thank you. Sweet.
Hey, here I go again. For all of you here, thank you for being here. Please join us for some kinship and fellowship in the community room. Those of you online, thank you so much for your great conversation and listening, and have a lovely Sunday.
See you guys. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.